They say betrayal doesn't always crash into your life like a storm. Sometimes it leaks in slow, quiet, almost polite. You don't see it until your floors are ruined, your foundation cracked. That's how it started for me. Just a morning like any other. At least that's what I thought. I'm Ryan, 34. I design bridges for a living. Not the metaphorical kind, real ones with tension cables and rebar and exact math that holds thousands of lives above water. There's comfort in that kind of certainty. You know the load limit. You know what holds and what doesn't. I wish relationships worked the same way. That morning, I didn't have to rush. My usual 8 a.m. project review got canceled the night before. So I slept in a bit, rolled out of bed to the smell of nothing. No coffee brewing. No toast. No Brooke humming off-key to her morning playlist. Just silence. She was gone. No note. No have a good day. Not even the quiet creak of the door I usually half heard in my sleep. I checked my phone. No text. The house felt weirdly hollow, like it knew something I didn't. But I chalked it up to a bad night's sleep and the shock of a slow morning. My mind's always racing. Engineering problems, cost overruns, vendor delays, so I didn't question it too deeply. I brushed it off. That was mistake number 1. I figured I'd treat myself to something different. Instead of heading into the office, I decided to stop by this Café Brooke had been going on about for weeks. Juniper and Sage. It's just a few blocks from her marketing agency downtown. She'd mentioned it maybe a dozen times. They make this lavender oat milk latte I swear you'd love. Or, you have to try the lemon ricotta scones. But I'd never actually been. Just one of those things I kept pushing off. You think there'll always be time. It was around 9:30 when I pulled into a metered spot and made my way in. The place looked like something out of a magazine. Brick walls, matte black fixtures, hanging plants, acoustic covers of pop songs playing just loud enough to fill the silence. I ordered a black coffee and sat by the window. I wasn't expecting anything. I just wanted a calm moment. But calm was the last thing I got. I'd only taken 2 sips when I heard her voice. Brooke's laugh. Light, effortless. Familiar in a way that hit me square in the chest. I froze for a second. It was like hearing a song from your childhood in a place it doesn't belong. I turned my head slightly, careful not to draw attention. There she was. My wife. She was tucked away in the corner of the cafe, half-shadowed by a potted fiddle leaf fig, sitting across from a man I didn't recognize. He had on a fitted navy jacket, thick forearms, a sharp jawline covered in neatly kept stubble, the kind of guy who always looked like he'd just stepped out of a catalog without trying. He leaned in, elbows on the table, smiling with his whole face. And Brooke, she looked radiant. Her hair was curled in loose waves the way she used to do it on special nights. She was animated, talking with her hands, eyes wide and excited in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. I watched her mouth the words 3-day weekend and Big Bend, and my stomach tightened. Big Bend. We talked about that trip every year and never managed to go. Work, timing, excuses. She always said she wanted to hike the window trail with me, just the 2 of us. Now she was planning it with someone else. I leaned back, careful to stay hidden by the angle of the window and the tall menu display. My heart thudded in my chest, loud and disorienting, like it was trying to warn me. I kept telling myself maybe it was just work. Maybe he was a new coworker, a client. Maybe this was all innocent. But my gut knew better. The way they were talking, it wasn't professional. It was relaxed and asterisk mate. Like 2 people who had found their rhythm and didn't need to try anymore. She reached across the table at one point, brushed something off his sleeve. He laughed and said something I couldn't hear, and she rolled her eyes and leaned in closer, touching her forehead to the back of her hand the way she does when she's genuinely amused. And here's the thing. I hadn't seen her laugh like that with me in months. I sat there frozen, hand gripping my paper coffee cup so tightly I thought it might collapse. 100 thoughts ran through my mind. Should I walk over? Should I say something? Pretend I just happened to stop by? But I didn't. Something held me in place. I don't know if it was fear or denial or some instinct that told me I wasn't ready to hear whatever excuse she'd come up with. I just watched. For 23 more minutes. I counted. I watched the woman I married act like I didn't exist. They finished their drinks. He stood first, reaching for her bag like it was second nature. She let him. She smiled. An easy, familiar smile. And the two of them walked out together without so much as a glance in my direction. And just like that, she was gone again. No goodbye. No note. I didn't follow. I just sat there staring at the chair she'd left behind, my coffee long since gone cold. That chair still had a crease from where she sat, like a ghost of the moment that had just passed. I thought about how many times I'd made excuses for the weird little changes, the new passwords on our streaming accounts, the way she started turning her phone over when she left it on the counter, the last-minute errands that always seemed to pull her away during dinner. Suddenly they weren't so little. I left the cafe in a daze. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I got in my car and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel like it might hold me together. The digital clock blinked 10:17 a.m. The day was still young, and already I felt like it had broken me in half. I didn't go to work. Instead, I drove around aimlessly for an hour, circling familiar streets that now felt foreign. I passed the bookstore where we had our first date, the park bench where I proposed, the Target where we fought over bath towels once and she laughed because I cared too much about thread count. Those places used to feel like milestones. Now they felt like ruins. I eventually ended up at a quiet overlook just outside the city, a place I'd gone to think in college. I parked, stepped out of the car, and just stood there. I didn't cry. Not then. I just stared out over the valley and tried to piece together when exactly my marriage had started to unravel. And more importantly, why I hadn't noticed sooner. Maybe it's because we want to believe the best in the people we love. We train ourselves to look past the noise, to see what we hope is still there. But sometimes the truth isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Subtle. A laugh in a cafe. A missing note. A plan that doesn't include you. And in that silence, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just a bad morning. This was the first signal. And deep down I knew I couldn't unsee it now. Not ever again. After that morning at the cafe, I didn't confront her. I told myself it was better to wait. To observe. To understand what I was really dealing with before saying something I couldn't take back. Maybe that was cowardly. Maybe it was smart. All I know is that something in me went quiet after that day. A sort of inward folding. Brooke came home late that night. She walked through the door like nothing had happened, kicked off her heels, dropped her bag in its usual spot by the console table, and gave me the same tired smile I'd grown used to over the last few months. "Sorry, long day," she said, already halfway down the hall before I could even muster a response. I nodded, though she didn't see it. My throat felt like it was filled with gravel. In the days that followed, I started paying closer attention. Not paranoid closer, just sharper. More present. I was listening now, not just hearing. And the more I listened, the more the silence between us began to scream. She'd always been guarded with her phone, but now it was constant. It never left her hand. She started setting its screen down even in the bathroom, and at night she tucked it under her pillow like a secret. Once, while she was in the shower, I walked past the sink and noticed it light up with a notification. The preview only said, "Can't stop thinking about," but the rest was cut off. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. My gut filled in the rest. Passwords changed. Our shared Netflix profile suddenly had shows I'd never watched, romantic dramas and action flicks she used to roll her eyes at. I'd ask her about them and she'd just say, "Oh, must have played while I was folding laundry," without even blinking. She started going on weekend work trips too. Quick little retreats with her marketing team to brainstorm, usually at some upscale Airbnb in the hill country. I used to encourage her to take breaks from work, thought it would help her recharge. But now every new trip felt like an alibi. She never asked if I wanted to tag along. Just announced them with a breezy, "I'll be gone Friday through Sunday, can you feed the dog?" The first time, I barely reacted. By the third, I was taking *TS of our shared calendar and marking the receipts I found in our online banking. That's another thing. The money. We've always been organized with finances, joint checking for the big stuff, personal accounts for small indulgences. But I started noticing little transactions that didn't sit right. A $300 charge from a spa we'd never used. A boutique wine order. Uber rides in parts of the city she never mentioned. When I asked, she'd blink, confused, and say, "Huh. Oh, right. That was for a client event or must have been a system error." Her explanations came fast, too fast, like she'd rehearsed them. Then there was the cologne. The first time, it was faint. She got home late after one of those client dinners, and when she leaned over to kiss me goodnight, I smelled something sharp and unfamiliar, earthy, musky, definitely not me. I asked about it, half laughing, just to see her reaction. She blinked. One of the guys at work hugged me goodbye. You know how people wear too much cologne sometimes? I nodded like an idiot. But the second time it wasn't faint. It was on her clothes. Her neck. Her wrists. Like she'd worn it herself. I began withdrawing slowly but not on purpose. I just couldn't reach for her the same way anymore. When we passed each other in the hallway there was no gravity between us. Just the brushing of sleeves like strangers on a crowded train. In bed, she started sleeping further away. One night I woke up cold, reached out by instinct, and found the sheets empty beside me. She was downstairs, scrolling on her phone in the dark. When I asked if she was okay, she said she couldn't sleep. That her mind was just racing. Stress from the new campaign, she told me. I nodded again. Always nodding. Like I was signing off on my own erasure. Even the language between us changed. We used to be us. Now everything was I. I already ate. I made plans this weekend. I think I'm just tired. She stopped asking about my day. Didn't laugh at my dumb inside jokes. No more spontaneous texts. No more forehead kisses while I worked late at the kitchen table. Just sterile civility. We were polite to each other. That was somehow worse than fighting. It was like we'd become two employees in the same apartment, sharing space and bandwidth but nothing else. The thing that struck me most wasn't even the lying. It was how easily she adapted to the distance. Like she'd already practiced this life without me. Sometimes I'd watch her when she didn't know I was looking. Sitting on the couch, smiling softly at whatever was on her screen, or stepping out onto the balcony to take a call in hushed tones. There was a lightness to her then. The version of Brooke I fell in love with was still in there, just not for me anymore. One night I tried to bridge the gap. I cooked her favorite dinner, basil chicken pasta, homemade garlic bread, the whole deal. I even found the old jazz playlist we used to put on when we danced barefoot in the kitchen. She came home, saw the table set, and her face flashed something complicated. She smiled. Sat down. Ate. But there was a wall between us and nothing I did could climb over it. Halfway through the meal, her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, face unreadable, and flipped it over. Everything okay? I asked. She nodded, chewing quietly. Just work stuff. She used to tell me everything. Now, I didn't even know who work was. That night, I stared at the ceiling for hours while she breathed evenly beside me. Her back turned. Our limbs not even close to touching. I thought about all the years we'd built together. The late nights. The road trips. The whispered dreams about kids, a bigger house, maybe even moving somewhere quieter one day. Now I couldn't even ask where she'd been without feeling like I was trespassing. Eventually, I stopped asking. I started keeping my own space. Taking my lunch to the office instead of texting to meet her. Canceling plans with friends who always asked, "How's Brooke?" and watching their faces shift when I said, "She's good," with a forced smile. I wasn't angry yet. Not then. I was just disappearing. And what scared me most was how easy it was for her to let me go, inch by inch, smile by smile, without even realizing, or maybe without caring, that she was doing it. Some nights I still held out hope. That she'd come home and just fall into my arms. That she'd cry and say something wasn't right and she didn't know how to fix it but she wanted to try. But that conversation never came. Instead, I learned to sit in the quiet and listen to the hum of the refrigerator. The ticking of the hallway clock. The sound of the garage door closing at strange hours. And in that silence, the truth slowly settled in. Brooke wasn't mine anymore. Not in the ways that mattered. And maybe she hadn't been for a long time. There's a moment just before the truth hits where everything in you wants to look away. Even when the facts are staring you down. Even when your gut has been screaming for weeks. You still hope you're wrong. Because being wrong means there's something left to save. I was still hoping, even as I opened the Find My app. It was a quiet Saturday morning, a rare one when Brooke wasn't already out the door before I could make coffee. She had told me 3 days earlier that she'd be out of town this weekend, some corporate retreat at a vineyard an hour and a half south. Team bonding, she called it, while folding a weekend bag with jeans she hadn't worn in months and a silky top I'd never seen before. She said it casually like it was no big deal. I just nodded like always. But this time I had a plan. We'd set up device tracking on our phones years ago when she lost hers on a hike. At the time it was a joke, "You can always find me," she'd said, laughing. I never turned it off. So that morning, with her supposed to be sipping wine with her coworkers, I sat on the edge of our bed and checked her location. I stared at the screen, heart hammering. She wasn't at a vineyard. She was at a house. An address I didn't recognize. Just outside the city limits, in a suburb we'd never had reason to visit. Quiet street, cul-de-sac, surrounded by woods. Too remote for a work event. Too personal for a professional getaway. I stared at the little blinking dot on the map, trying to rationalize it. Maybe her team booked an Airbnb there. Maybe there was a last-minute change. Maybe? But no. No more maybes. I grabbed my keys and went. The drive felt like it lasted hours, though the app told me it was only 47 minutes. I barely remember the roads. Just the white-knuckle grip on the steering wheel and the sound of my own breath echoing in my ears. I didn't know what I was going to do when I got there. I wasn't even sure why I was going. But I couldn't sit in our house or home any longer pretending not to know. I pulled onto the street just past 11 a.m. The neighborhood was eerily calm. Birds chirped. A lawn sprinkler rotated lazily. Kids' bikes lay tipped over on a driveway 3 houses down. And there it was, the house. Beige siding. White trim. 2 cars parked in the driveway. One of them Brooks. I parked a ways down, out of view, and walked the rest of the way, keeping to the tree line. It felt surreal, like I was sleepwalking through someone else's story. The closer I got, the heavier my limbs felt. My hands trembled. There was a backyard gate slightly ajar, like an invitation I didn't want. I stepped through it. That's when I saw her. Brooke. Standing on the back patio, drink in hand, dressed in something casual but flattering, a soft cardigan, jeans, sandals I hadn't seen since last summer. She was laughing, head tilted, hair tucked behind her ear the way she did when she wanted someone's full attention. And next to her, his hand on the small of her back, was a man I'd never seen before. Tall. Fit. Shaved head. A tattoo of some kind snaked up the side of his neck, maybe a bird or wings, I couldn't tell. He looked relaxed. Familiar. Like this was normal for him. Like this wasn't their first morning like this. Brooke leaned into him effortlessly, her body language so comfortable it made my skin crawl. He said something that made her laugh again, and then she turned and, God help me, kissed him. Not a quick peck. Not some awkward moment. It was practiced. Fluid. The kind of kiss that had happened dozens of times before. Maybe hundreds. I froze. I didn't gasp. I didn't stumble backward. I didn't charge in like in the movies. I just stood there, watching. I felt completely hollow and overstuffed at the same time, like every cell in my body was vibrating with disbelief, but my mind had gone completely still. So this was it. The truth. The proof. Not just suspicion. Not vibes or intuition or the slow drip of red flags. This was physical, visible betrayal. Concrete as the patio stones under their feet. They didn't see me. I was just part of the trees. A shadow in a world they thought was theirs alone. For a brief second, I wondered if she'd done this here before. If this house was part of their routine. If some of those team weekends had really been reruns of this exact scene, her in that cardigan, him with his easy smile, drinks on the patio while I waited at home like a fool. I turned away. I didn't need to see more. I made my way back to the car like a sleepwalker. The engine roared to life, and I drove with no music, no thoughts, just that single image burned into my skull, her hand resting on his chest like it belonged there. The road home blurred into one long stretch of nothing. When I pulled into our driveway, everything looked the same. Our rosebush needed pruning. The porch light was still flickering. My coffee mug from yesterday sat on the windowsill. But nothing was the same. I sat in the car with the engine running, staring at the garage door, wondering what version of myself would walk through it this time. I didn't feel like me. I didn't feel like Ryan, the husband. Or even Ryan, the man who loved his wife. That guy had been left on a back patio 47 minutes away. Eventually, I shut off the car and went inside. I didn't scream. I didn't punch a wall. I didn't cry. I just stood in the foyer, listening to the silence. Then I walked upstairs, sat on the edge of her bed, and stared at the floor until the sun started to fade. I didn't know what I was going to do next. I didn't have some brilliant plan. But one thing was clear, Brooke had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. And now? It was my move. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid in our bed, and stared at the ceiling while the shadows shifted across it. The space beside me was cold, untouched. Brooke was still at the house. Still with him. I imagined them laughing. I imagined their limbs tangled in sheets. I imagined a version of her that didn't feel like my wife anymore. A version I didn't know. Maybe never did. At some point in the early morning, I got up and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the spot where she usually dropped her keys. I waited. I wasn't sure what for. Clarity? Rage? Tears? None came. Instead, I wrote a note. It was short. Just a few lines. I didn't even sign it. But I included something I hadn't thought about in years, a detail from one of our first dates. A signal only she'd recognize. It was the name of the candle she once said smelled like home. I left it lit on the counter, burning quietly next to the note. It was my way of saying, I saw you. Then I left. I packed a duffel bag with a few days' worth of clothes, my laptop, my passport, and the old watch my grandfather gave me. I didn't take anything else. I didn't slam a door. I didn't leave a dramatic voicemail. I didn't give her the scene she might have expected. Just silence. I called Jack on the drive out of the city. Jack and I have been friends since college. He's the kind of guy who answers the phone before the second ring, even if it's been months. He didn't ask questions. Didn't pry. Just said, come through, and texted me the gate code to his apartment complex. That was all I needed. When I got there, he handed me a beer, nodded toward the guest room, and let me sit in the silence I brought with me. No explanations. No pressure. Just space. That night, I stared at the ceiling of someone else's home and tried to remember when my life had last felt like mine. The days that followed blurred together. Brooke texted once. Just one message. I read your note. Can we talk? I didn't answer. The next night, she texted again. Please. I owe you the truth. I ignored that too. But on the third night, just as I was brushing my teeth, my phone lit up again. It wasn't just him. That stopped me cold. Not just him? I sat down, toothbrush still in hand, heart pounding in my ears. I read it over again. Then again. My thumb hovered over the screen, debating a reply. But what could I say? How many? Why? Who else? The answers wouldn't help me. The damage was done. She didn't call. Didn't show up at Jack's door. That surprised me. For a while, I thought she'd come storming in with apologies or justifications or whatever she thought might soften the blow. But she didn't. Maybe she knew there was nothing left to say. Instead, 3 days later, I got a single, typed letter in my inbox. The subject line read, I'm not expecting forgiveness, but you deserve the truth. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The message wasn't long. Just enough to confirm what I'd already suspected: the man on the patio wasn't her first. Or even her second. There'd been others. Casual flings during conferences. An emotional connection with a coworker that turned physical during a layover. A mistake that turned into a 3-month affair while I was working overtime on a project I thought I was building for us. She didn't blame me. She didn't give excuses. She said, somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as the person who mattered most. And I never admitted that to myself because I knew what it meant. The honesty was sobering. Not because I respected it, but because I realized how far gone she really was. She ended the letter with a single line. I'm sorry I broke you. I don't expect you to believe it, but I did love you once. That was the moment I felt something break loose inside me. Not anger. Not grief. Just release. She was right. She did love me once. And I had loved a version of her that no longer existed. That night I took a walk. Not far. Just through Jack's neighborhood, where the houses were quiet and the air smelled like night-blooming jasmine. I thought about all the signs I'd ignored. All the moments I'd excused. How many times I'd chalked her distance up to stress, or work, or just a phase. But phases end. This didn't. I called my mother the next day. She'd always liked Brooke, at least the version of her I introduced. I told her it was over. She didn't ask why. She just said, come home when you're ready. I didn't tell her what Brooke had done. Some part of me still felt ashamed, like I had failed. Like I should have stopped it, seen it, fought harder. But deep down, I knew this wasn't something I could have fixed. Brooke had made her choices. Now it was my turn. I called a lawyer the next morning. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't rage. It was survival. I needed to protect what was left of my name, my work, my future. Because even if I was no longer someone's husband, I was still someone. And that had to be enough. Later that day, I sent Brooke a message. My first since I left. It was simple. I've started the paperwork. You'll be contacted soon. Please don't come to Jack's. I need space. And I need you to respect that. She replied 2 hours later. I understand. I won't contact you again. If you need anything from the house, let me know. That was the last I heard from her directly. 2 weeks later, she came to collect her things. I wasn't there. Couldn't be. I asked Jack to be home in case anything went sideways, but he said it was quick. Clinical. She barely looked around. She left a single box behind, my old college hoodie, a few photos, a mug that said Bridge Builder in faded black font. Stuff that didn't mean anything anymore. Jack said she lingered at the front door when she was done. Like she was waiting for something. A sign. A goodbye. Redemption, maybe. But he just nodded and said, take care. She didn't respond. She got into her car and drove away. And just like that, she was gone. Not quietly, not loudly, just finally. I thought the worst was over once she walked out the door. Turns out, heartbreak was just the prelude. The real fallout started a week after Brooke picked up her things. I was still staying at Jack's, spending most of my time either at work or avoiding it entirely. I'd stopped checking social media, stopped answering calls from mutual friends who just wanted to check in. I was trying to move on, quietly, cleanly. Then I opened our joint bank account. I hadn't looked in weeks. I'd assumed we were both just coasting on autopilot until the legal stuff started. But something made me check. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was instinct. And what I found stopped me cold. A $3,800 charge to a consulting firm I'd never heard of. 3 weeks before she left. Then another, $500 labeled professional development. Processed the same day she was supposedly at a brand strategy seminar in Santa Fe. I scrolled further. $900 to an online course. $1,200 for graphic design services. $2,750 to a coaching mastermind based out of Albuquerque. In total, over $15,000 in charges I couldn't explain. All withdrawn from our joint funds. And all pointing to one thing. She wasn't just cheating on me emotionally or physically. She was using me. My name, my money, my credentials to build a new life. I dug deeper, this time pulling up credit reports and account statements from both of us. We'd set up financial transparency years ago when we started thinking about buying a second property. At the time, it felt like trust. Now it felt like a crime scene. Buried in one of the folders, I found a PDF. Poorly named, half buried in her cloud drive, probably forgotten. Consulting agreement, nm_contract_3.pdf. I opened it, and there it was. My name, my license number, my signature. Only, I never signed that contract. The logo at the top belonged to a sustainability firm in New Mexico. Apparently, I was listed as an independent advisor on a 3-month project involving infrastructure analytics. The problem? I had never heard of this company, never spoken to anyone affiliated with it, never agreed to work for them. But Brooke had, and she'd used everything I had spent my career building to pull it off. I sat at Jack's kitchen table for hours, going through every email, invoice, receipt I could find. The more I looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was a pattern. Brooke had used my resume to pad her consulting credentials. She had reworded my project experience and listed herself as strategic lead on work she had nothing to do with. She was building her personal brand on my back. I found fake testimonials, LinkedIn endorsements, even a glowing write-up she'd ghostwritten for herself, quoting one of my clients. It wasn't just unethical. It was identity theft, and I had no idea how long it had been going on. First, I felt sick, then furious. But after that, something else settled in. A cold, sharp focus I hadn't felt in months. Maybe not even years. If she wanted to rewrite our history, fine. But I was going to write the ending. That week, I met with an attorney. Juliana Grant came highly recommended. A quiet force in a clean-cut suit, known for high-stakes litigation and an icy calm that made other lawyers sweat. Jack had worked with her once during a contract dispute. "She's composed," he said. "But she doesn't blink." I brought everything: bank statements, PDFs, *TS, copies of the fake contracts. I laid it all out on her desk like a case file. Juliana listened without interruption. Every few minutes, she'd jot something down or raise an eyebrow slightly. But she never stopped me. When I finished, she asked one question. "Do you want to press charges?" It hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't thought about it in legal terms. Not yet. I was still trapped in the emotional wreckage, trying to figure out what I'd missed, how I'd been so thoroughly erased from a marriage I thought was still salvageable just months ago. But now, staring at the paper trail, it was clear. This wasn't just betrayal. It was fraud. I nodded slowly. Yes. I want her held accountable. Juliana didn't flinch. Then let's begin. We started by freezing the joint accounts. She filed an emergency motion to secure all remaining funds before anything else disappeared. Then she dug into the consulting firm that had signed the fake contract. Turns out Brooke had used my email domain as a reference point for her partnership even though I hadn't logged into that account in months. Juliana contacted the firm directly, flagged the fraud, and got their internal counsel involved. Within 48 hours, the contract was terminated. My name was cleared. Brooke's name was flagged in their system as a risk-level collaborator. But it didn't stop there. While combing through public social media connections tied to Brooke's new ventures, Juliana found something else. A tagged photo of Brooke at a networking retreat. Not unusual. But the man standing beside her in the photo? Him. The guy from the patio. The one with the neck tattoo. He was wearing a name badge. And it had a last name. It took 10 minutes of searching to find his wife. Victoria. She was a nurse practitioner based in Austin. Her Facebook page was private, but Juliana knew how to find what she needed. A few clicks later, we had a work number. I wasn't sure if I should call. But I did. Her voice on the phone was steady. Almost too steady. Like she'd already been waiting for this call. When I explained who I was and what I'd seen, she didn't sound surprised. Just tired. I knew something was off, she said quietly. He always blamed me for being suspicious. Said I was imagining things. I have proof, I said. If you want it. I do. I sent her the photos. The contract. Even the Airbnb receipt from the weekend Brooke was supposedly out of town. A few hours later, she texted me. I filed this morning. Thank you. Just like that, Brooke's web started to unravel from every side. She didn't see it coming. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel powerless. I felt awake. I was no longer mourning the loss of a woman who never really existed. I was reclaiming the version of myself I had abandoned to keep our marriage alive. And there was still more to uncover. Juliana didn't waste time. Within days, she filed suit against Brooke for unauthorized use of my professional credentials, misappropriation of funds, and identity fraud. The court issued an injunction freezing assets tied to her business ventures. Brooke tried to play it off, claiming miscommunication, but the paper trail was undeniable. When the subpoenas hit, she panicked. Her tone shifted from defiance to desperation. She emailed me, called from unknown numbers, even sent a letter by mail. I didn't reply. I had nothing left to give her. But the biggest shock came when Juliana suggested we contact the IRS. Brooke had filed income under my name. Unreported. If I hadn't discovered it, I would have been liable for tens of thousands. It wasn't just about cheating anymore, it was fraud, plain and simple. Meanwhile, Victoria followed through with her divorce. She thanked me again. Said my call gave her the clarity she'd been too scared to face. Brooke's lover? He went dark. Deleted socials. Quit his job. Ran. Brooke had set the fire. Now she was choking on the smoke.